Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national broadcaster about India's foreign policy, India's international relations, and global trends and developments that have an influence on India's role in the world. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking up the role of the United States in the Indo-Pacific. The US, a great power in the world, but especially focused on the Indo-Pacific in the last decade or so, in order to maintain balance and a free and open Indo-Pacific. How successful the US has been, what the US strategy is going forward as this region undergoes complex and difficult changes. This is the topic for this episode. And to discuss this, let me introduce you to a very special and esteemed guest who is joining me in the studio, Lisa Curtis. Lisa Curtis is a very well-known figure on Indo-Pacific studies and analysis. She has worked under multiple American presidents in the Central Intelligence Agency, in the National Security Council, and the US State Department, and is currently at the Center for New American Security. She heads the Indo-Pacific Studies. Lisa, welcome to India. Welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really great to be here.
Lisa, let me start with something topical. While the Indo-Pacific as a construct has been evolving and the US has been heavily involved in building the regional architecture, lately there is the storm cloud of multiple wars going on far away from the Indo-Pacific. We have the hot wars in Eastern Europe and now in West Asia or the Middle East. And there's always the question about American strategic endurance or willingness to stay the course in the Indo-Pacific. Many countries in the region have been doubtful and frequently air, the grievance that is the US really committed and will it remain here and will it, project force and power in the region sufficiently, or will it get diverted or distracted? So with the Israel-Hamas war, with the Russia-Ukraine war, there is again the same question that's arising. Is the US committed, and will it be able to really credibly commit to the region, or could it militarily get distracted again to faraway places that might leave many people out here in the lurch?
Well, you're right. There is so much going on in the world today. Of course, you've had the Russia's war in Ukraine for the last 18 months. Now this horrible Middle East crisis, really war between Israel and Hamas. And you're right, this is taking up a lot of US diplomatic and bandwidth, as well as resources. We just saw the debate in the US Congress about a new aid package where, about $14 billion in military assistance will go to Israel. So there are a lot of distractions, but I think the US cannot afford to, look away from the Indo-Pacific region. This is really a critical region. The competition between US and China is fierce and ongoing. And, unfortunately, what we saw is that deterrence failed. Deterrence failed in Europe. That's why we had Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Deterrence failed in the situation in Israel. That's why Hamas attacked Israel. We can't afford to have deterrence fail in the Indo-Pacific. And what that means is the US needs to maintain the momentum of all the initiatives that it has started already in the region. You look at everything that's happened over the last couple of years, the elevation and strengthening of the Quad, and everything that means. You look at the AUKUS initiative, which is the initiative for the UK and the United States to ensure that Australia gets access and has the capability to deploy nuclear-powered submarines, which will help in deterrence in the Pacific. You look at the initiative to encourage US, South Korea, Japan cooperation, a historic summit that took place in Camp David in August. You look at everything that's happened with the US-India relationship and the technology and defense initiatives that have been started. All of this is part of an effort to support a peaceful, stable, rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific and to deter conflict and maintain peace. And so it's simply critical that the United States maintains the momentum of those initiatives. Because if it doesn't, then I think we risk having another crisis on our hands, which would be in the form of Chinese aggression against Taiwan.
And that would be presumably a lot worse because, I mean, given the resources that China has, I mean, I was hearing the guru of international relations academic scholarship, John Mearsheimer, saying recently that, you know, the war in Ukraine was a big mistake, and now this war in Gaza is a big mistake from an American grand strategy point of view, because he's saying that, you know, China is the, as the US says, a pacing challenge. And so, rationally speaking, they should pivot or rebalance fully. In fact, I was reading the Hamas leader, Khalid Mishal, saying that you know, our attack on Israel has benefited the Russians because it's already diverted the Americans away from Ukraine. So, and they also, you know, some of these are interlinked, right? These conflicts, because Iran has also a close alliance-like relationship now with Russia. So in that context, you know, do you think in terms of the military assets and the projections, you know, for what is required for balance in the Indo-Pacific, you think the US military will be up to this task to, as one of our analysts said, the US can, you know, walk, whistle, and also chew gum? And is that really possible now, you think? Or do you foresee trouble with rationing and division of resources?
Well, of course, resources are limited, so that is one issue. But in terms of diplomatic attention and, you know, monitoring the situations that are happening, of course, this is possible. And it's possible if the U.S. relies on partners and allies in each situation. For example, in the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. is working very closely with its NATO allies. And, you know, we'll have to see Europe step up and do more because the U.S. is, as you said, spread thin across the world. This is what happens when you're a global leader. But it's not impossible. It's challenging. You know, when I was in the Trump administration, I served in the Trump administration at the National Security Council. And, you know, there at that time was the India-China border crisis of 2020. Yeah. And, you know, it was critical that the U.S. show solidarity with India in its confrontation with China. And this was important, and I think it did help to build the the U.S.-India relationship, rather, which is also very important. The U.S. looks to India to play a leading role, not only in, you know, South Asia, but also looking further east. And India is developing relationships with the Southeast Asian nations and having more of an impact in that region. So I think this is how the U.S. Stays engaged in all these different regions. It looks to like-minded partners and allies to help carry the load, to take some of that burden off. And so I think, you know, that's why it's important for India to, you know, continue to play its leadership role in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right. So, viewers, what Lisa Curtis is saying is that there is this notion of offshore balancing. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have to be physically present in each and every theater, but from behind it can support and prop up countries that are facing hegemonic challenges in their respective regions. So Indo-Pacific, there's no question that China poses the hegemonic challenge to a lot of smaller countries. And on this, I have an interesting video clip of a recent incidents involving China trying to browbeat the Philippines in the South China Sea. Let's watch this, because this is a central phenomenon or a, you know, continuing problem that we are facing in the region of the Indo-Pacific. Let's watch this and continue the discussion.
China and the Philippines are trading blame over a Sunday collision in the South China Sea. Shown here in video released by the Philippines Armed Forces, it appears to show a Chinese vessel grazing the hull of a Philippines boat on a resupply mission. The run-in is the most recent in a series of maritime confrontations between the two countries in the last few months, which have been concentrated near the contested Spratly Islands. The Philippines says its boat was on its way to resupply the BRP Sierra Madre, a World War II-era U.S.-built warship grounded over 2 decades ago on the disputed Second Thomas Shoal and now used as a base for Philippines Marines. The Philippines National Security Council condemned the collision on Monday.
Continued Chinese blocking and interference by Chinese vessels with our regular and routine rotation and resupply missions, RORE, to BRP Sierra Madre may lead to disastrous results. While no lives were lost in the collisions yesterday, China's provocative and irresponsible actions have clearly imperiled once again the safety of the Filipino crew.
China's Coast Guard released their own footage of the incident a day later. They maintained they were, quote, lawfully blocking the Philippine boat from transporting, quote, illegal construction materials to a disputed atoll, and said the boat ignored repeated warnings and had, quote, deliberately provoked trouble in crossing the bow of the Chinese ship, causing the collision. China's foreign ministry added they have shown, quote, great restraint and patience on the issue and would continue to take the necessary lawful measures to safeguard China's territorial sovereignty. The U.S. State Department has sided with the Philippines, saying China's actions amounted to repeated, quote, harassment in the South China Sea. Beijing lays claim to most of the area, including parts of the exclusive economic zones of the Philippines and other countries. The Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled in 2016 that Beijing's claims had no legal basis. Manila's relations with Beijing have soured under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who has strengthened military engagement with Washington since taking office last year. The Pentagon said in May it would protect the Philippines if its Coast Guard came under attack, quote, anywhere in the South China Sea.
Right. So, viewers, you just got a glimpse of the security challenges faced by smaller countries, Asian countries in the Indo-Pacific. Lisa, you have also written recently in The Diplomat about the threat that the smaller Southeast Asian countries are facing, this kind of browbeating or intimidation from the Chinese. I mean, just even visually, look at the Chinese vessel. It's like, so gigantic, and the Philippines is so under-resourced. And that's probably the imbalance that we are all facing in the region, especially smaller countries in the region. So, U.S. strategy, when you have a treaty ally like the Philippines, and they are standing up to China, as you are saying, obviously it's more than just moral and diplomatic, right? We will need probably more enhanced presence and freedom of navigation operations and a lot more activity in the waters, in the maritime spaces which are contested, for China to get the message. And it doesn't seem like China has been deterred much so far. You already talked about the Quad and all our joint endeavors and so on, but so far it's not really prevented the Chinese or deterred them enough from provoking smaller countries and grabbing more and more maritime spaces, building islands all over the place. This is a massive territorial grab they have done, by dredging up artificial islands and all that. So what do you think needs to be done going forward from a U.S. point of view? Obviously you're concerned, but what can we do now?
Well, this is not new. China has long been relying on what I would call gray zone activities. Gray zone activities are actions that seek to intimidate and coerce countries, but don't reach that level where it would provoke a military response. That's why we call them gray zone activities. So they've long been doing this. But I think more recently, they've gotten particularly aggressive with the Philippines. And, this could bring in the United States. The United States has been in an alliance relationship with the Philippines for the last 70 years. And so if the Philippines is attacked, the U.S. by treaty must support the Philippines. And so this is a concern that the U.S. could be brought in. There could be some kind of miscalculation or even, some kind of conflict. We've all been focused on the Taiwan Strait and worried about that, worried about China and its increasing aggressive military activities in the Taiwan Strait. But something could actually be provoked in the South China Sea as well. If we see China continue to rely on these gray zone tactics and to try to intimidate countries. And it's not just happening in the Philippines. It's also happened to Vietnam, Indonesia, Brunei.
The Chinese keep on expanding the claims, and these countries are under-equipped to actually individually push back.
But the Philippines has been creative about pushing back. What we saw a few weeks ago is that a Philippine Coast Guard who were disguised as fishermen went out and were able to remove some buoys that were preventing Philippine fishermen from getting into certain areas that China claims in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
And so it won't have an impact in that, still the fishermen won't be able to access these waters, but it was symbolic. And it shows the Philippines is sort of leading the way and showing other Southeast Asian nations how they too can stand up to China in some of these creative ways.
Yeah, Lisa, we had the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines on the show, on this show, and I remember Enrique Manalo, and we were talking about this. And certainly the current Philippine administration believes in standing up for their sovereignty and their rights, and that's a positive sign. Vietnam also, we all were watching with close interest in India, President Biden's visit to Vietnam and the upgrade of the strategic partnership to comprehensive strategic partnership. So, and also the repeated reassurances from the top levels of the US government that if Taiwan is attacked or invaded, then the US will get involved. India, of course, we have close strategic partnerships with all these countries, with Vietnam, with Philippines, and further afield with Japan and with the Quad countries. How do you see all of these, let's say, forces for stability and for respect for rule of law? How do you think all of them can work together? And what's the role of the US? Can the US be a kind of like a moderator or an aggregator of all these? Or do you think the US is stepping away from it and saying the region should manage its issues mainly and we'll be leading from behind?
No, I don't think that the U.S. is leading from behind. I don't think that that's the plan. The U.S. has been very much leading from the front and catalyzing a lot of these groupings. So when I say that the U.S. can't do it alone, I'm saying that, not that the U.S. is stepping back, but it's pulling up its allies and partners and making sure that they have the capabilities they need to be able to do their part to contribute to deterrence and building peace. And with India, that is making sure that India has the capabilities to be able to, protect itself, but also to be able to expand and contribute to peace even outside of the South Asia region into the broader Indo-Pacific region. And that's why the U.S. has leaned so far forward in terms of joint producing jet engine technology, talking about other technologies, AI, quantum computing, how they might be contributing to defense technologies, and Australia, making sure that Australia has the capabilities it needs to contribute to deterrence. So I think, that's what I mean when I say that the U.S. is working more closely with the allies and partners, not that it's leading from behind, but that it is pulling up its allies and partners so that they can also contribute to deterring aggressive Chinese behavior.
Yeah.
Yes.
Build the capacities in the region and also the architecture. Viewers, there is also parallel to all this, the tensions and the competition between China and the US, also efforts at some kind of a thaw or a diplomatic rapprochement between China and the US. And every administration, from Obama to Trump to Biden, they have been also trying to somehow set some guardrails so that great power competition does not degenerate into all-out war and all those things. So there is a lot of diplomacy also attempting to stabilize the China-US competition, if not bring about some kind of cooperation. And on this, I'd like you to hear interesting remarks by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi alongside the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Let's hear them and continue the discussion.
Good evening. I'm very pleased to welcome Foreign Minister Wang Yi to the United States. I very much look forward to constructive conversation.
中美两个大国，我们有分歧，有矛盾，但同时我们也有重要的共同利益，有需要共同应对的挑战。所以，中美双方需要对话，我们要恢复对话，我们更要深入对话、全面对话。通过对话， 来增进我们的相互了解，消除误解和误判。那么，不断地寻求和扩大共识，开展互利合作，推动双边关系止跌企稳，尽快回到健康、稳定、可持续的发展轨道。双边关系中总会有这样那样的杂音，但是我们淡然处之，因为我们认为判断是非的标准不是谁胳膊粗，也不是谁嗓门大，而是要看是否遵循了中美3个联合公报的规定，是否符合国际法和国际关系基本准则，是否顺应了时代发展进步的潮流。我们相信最终时间会和事实会证明一切，历史会做出公正的评价，公正的评价。
是否愿意说服伊朗别介入、别扩大？
I agree with what the foreign minister said.
So viewers, interesting developments always when China and the US try to do some kind of a rapprochement. Lisa, you look skeptical, and many of us also, those who study great power competition believe that it's inevitable and it's not going to calm down. But Wang Yi is saying that, things will calm down just if we have dialogue. So foreign ministers and then presidents, and they're going to have summits. But then, like we discussed, the ground realities or the realities in the waters of the Indo-Pacific is something else. But there is always a question, Lisa, from our point of view and those in the region. Are the Americans going to do some kind of a deal? In the past, you'll recall, you're a veteran in this, there used to be talk of a G2, that China and the US will somehow divide up the world and say, you take this part and I'll manage this part and we'll not bother each other. And a sphere of influence is going to be carved out for China and that sort of thing. So lurking behind these kind of, initiatives, diplomatic efforts to quote unquote stabilize China-US relations is the question, could the US abandon the region and leave everybody here to the Chinese wolves, that sort of thing. So what do you think is actually happening? Why are they trying to do this? And at the end of it, what is it going to achieve?
Well, look, the Chinese foreign minister's words were very nice. But I think we have learned that you cannot judge China and where it wants to go by the words only. You have to look at the actions, what's happening in the region. And we just talked about the aggressive maritime actions in the South China Sea, the military actions in the Taiwan Strait. So I think that's the important thing. That's wonderful. Those words are very nice, but the U.S. will be looking at what's actually happening in the region, and that's how they will form their strategy. But clearly, the Chinese are interested in having these discussions. And I think rather than call it a rapprochement that you're calling it, I would say keeping the lines of communication open.
Right.
It's important to keep talking, even when tensions are high. I think that's important, and I think that's the U.S. motivation is simply keeping those lines of communication open. But what won't stop is the U.S. will continue to try to make sure that we have resilient supply chains, that we are not depending on China in strategic areas, and the U.S. will continue to restrict technology, just like the executive order that the White House did a year ago and recently updated to restrict
On semiconductors, yeah.
semiconductor, the high-end semiconductor technology, because the U.S. Is concerned about China getting ahead in the technology race, particularly when it comes to applying these emerging technologies like AI to defense purposes. So the U.S. will continue those actions even as it keeps those lines of communication and dialogue going with China. I think that's really important to remember. So I don't foresee any breakthroughs in these talks. I don't see any major change or realignment. Certainly don't see any chance of a G2. Really, I haven't heard that phrase in like 10 years.
Also, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that really is unrealistic. The U.S.-China strategic competition is here to stay. It's fierce. It will continue. And, keeping the lines of communication open doesn't really change the fundamentals of the US-China competition.
Yeah, of course, adversaries have to talk, and adversaries also need to convey, clear red lines and those sorts of things. Last word, Lisa. China-US competition is here to stay, you say, and what is the role for India here? I mean, India is rising; it's expected to catch up with China with faster economic growth in the next 10 years. But at present, it's relatively weaker. So in that kind of situation, it looks like this natural convergence US-India is going to keep going forward. How do you foresee the years to come? How can we manage the dragon together?
Well, I think the US-India relationship is strong. The foundations are there. There's been a lot of progress in recent months. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, President Biden's visit to New Delhi during the G20. We have upcoming 2+2 meetings that are happening, and perhaps another visit by President Biden to India early next year. So we have many reasons to be very confident in the US-India relationship. Yes, the China angle is a driver for that relationship. I don't think it's the only driver. We have strong people-to-people ties, an economic relationship that is moving forward, technology partnership. So I think, there are many reasons to be very optimistic about the future of the US-India relationship. We have weathered the differences over Russia, and, of course, there will be more challenges. We're both big, vibrant countries. There's bound to be issues that come up time to time between us. But I think I see the US and India weathering really any challenge that is likely to come up. And I think that the biggest potential concern or obstacle is just the unpredictability and the crises that are racking the globe right now. And that's really the biggest challenge, is to make sure that the US and India can continue to nurture their partnership and continue to remain focused on the Indo-Pacific. I think that's the biggest challenge we face.
Right. So viewers, Lisa Curtis says that we need to keep our eyes on the ball. Indo-Pacific is our theater. It is the ultimate theater that's going to determine 21st century world politics and power configuration. So India, and of course, is an Asian power, a rising Asian power, leading power, and then the United States, a resident power in the Pacific. We too have to work very closely. There's just no two ways about it. So I want to thank Lisa Curtis for sharing valuable insights. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So viewers, Indo-Pacific is hotting up, and United States strategy has to adapt to these changes, as we've discussed today. And India-US partnership remains a foundational pillar or a bedrock for the free and open Indo-Pacific to be achieved. Let's keep our attention on US-India cooperation in this region. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.